That winter, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a clock frozen at 11:59, and a note in my wife's handwriting. Mabes. I stood in the doorway, coat half buttoned, the cold bleeding in around my feet. The snow outside was falling slow, soft, too gentle for how heavy the moment felt. I hadn't ordered anything. No one had. And yet, the handwriting, the curves, the loops, they were her. For a long while I just held it. The paper smelled faintly of pine, the same scent she used to light in candles around Christmas. A year had passed since the hospital, since the last words we said that neither of us really meant. I had learned to live in silence. Or at least, the box was postmarked from a small antique shop upstate, the same one where we'd once stopped during a snowstorm years ago, the day we'd laughed over old clocks and broken toys, and said time had a cruel sense of humor. She'd lingered over a glass display that day, tracing her finger across a pocket watch that had long stopped ticking. There's something peaceful about broken things, she'd whispered. Now that same watch sat in my palm, its face cracked faintly, one hand missing the other, frozen between 11:59 and whatever came after. I turned it over and froze. On the back, engraved beneath the tarnish, were 6 words I'd never seen before. I felt my throat tighten. The air in the house seemed to hold its breath with me. I didn't remember her saying that, but I remembered waiting for her to forgive, waiting for her to forget, waiting for something that had already left. I placed the watch on the table beside the candle and sat down. The flame trembled gold and alive, and for a moment I could almost see her hands in the reflection of the glass, delicate, moving, as they always did, careful, even in silence. I whispered her name, not to call her, but to see if it still sounded real. It did. Too real. The letter was short. A single line written in that same patient handwriting you used to listen to the snow. I hope you still do. I laughed once quietly, like someone breaking in church. I hadn't listened to anything in months. The snow, the wind, the world, they'd all gone quiet the day she did. I lit another candle and placed it near the watch. Its flicker reflected in the cracked glass, turning 11:59 into a shimmer of gold and silver, almost alive. Then the strangest thing happened. The second hand twitched. Once. Just once. I blinked, leaned closer. The flame didn't move, but the hand had. It now rested exactly at midnight. A small, soundless laugh left me half disbelief, half surrender. Maybe it was the heat, maybe the air, or maybe this was her way of saying she'd finally stopped waiting for me to come back. That she'd given me time again, not to measure, but to remember. The house around me was still, but not empty. Every corner seemed to breathe with faint memory. Her voice, humming, her laughter tucked in the walls, the echo of cups clinking from some Christmas long ago. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I could see her again by the window, arranging the candles, turning back to me, with that same look that said, "You don't have to fill every silence." The clock stayed still, but something inside me moved. I thought of all the times I'd wasted trying to fix what wasn't broken. The quiet, the distance, the years. Maybe she'd known all along that time wouldn't heal me. Maybe she just wanted me to see that it was never time's fault. It was mine. Outside, the snow thickened. The world turned white, soft, forgiving. I picked up the watch again and held it to my ear. No ticking, no sound, just warmth, faint but there. Like it had stored something human inside it. Maybe that's all love ever does. It keeps 1 second alive, the one right before goodbye, and asks you to keep listening. I placed the watch on the mantel beside our photograph. The candlelight brushed across her face, across mine. For once, we looked the same age. I smiled quietly, the way you do when you've finally run out of things to fix. The clock read midnight. But it didn't feel like the end. It felt like time had finally forgiven me for surviving her. Morning came gray and heavy, the kind that doesn't rise. It just appears like a tired breath. The watch sat where I'd left it, still frozen at midnight. The candle beside it burned to a stub. The wax had spilled over the edge and hardened like snow sliding down a roof. I didn't plan to leave the house that day, but the return address on the parcel wouldn't leave me alone. Sterling Antiques, Fairview Road. We'd been there once. I remembered the crooked sign, the smell of cedar, and dust, the old man behind the counter, who smiled like he'd already seen the ending of every story that walked through his door. I took the watch, wrapped it in my scarf, and drove. The roads were quiet. No music, no chatter, just the hum of the heater and the sound of snow brushing against the windshield. The kind of silence that follows you even when you move. I parked outside the shop just past noon. The place looked smaller than I remembered. Its windows frosted, its lights soft and yellow. A small bell rang when I pushed the door open. The same scent hit me, pine oil, brass polish, something old enough to remember. Behind the counter, a man looked up. Not the same one as before, younger maybe, but with the same calm eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked. I placed the package on the counter, careful, like it might break the air around it. "You sent this," I said. "A clock, ordered a year ago." He looked at the handwriting, his brow softening. "Ah," he murmured, almost to himself. "Mrs. Miller." The name stung not because it hurt, but because someone else still remembered how to say it out loud. "She ordered it?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes, sir." "Last winter?" "She came in alone, asked if I could have it engraved before Christmas. Said it was a gift for her husband, but not to deliver until the following year. She said he'll need it more then than now." It numbed. My hands tightened on the counter. "Did she say anything else?" He smiled faintly. "Only one thing." She said tell him the watch never stopped. He just forgot how to listen. I didn't know what to say. The words fell into me like snow on open ground. Quiet, weightless, but impossible to brush off. She seemed peaceful when she said it. The man continued, like she already knew time would take care of the rest. I looked down at the watch again. Its glass caught the light from the window, the faint shimmer of noon sunlight, trying to pass through cloud. It looked alive in its own still way. "She knew I'd come," I whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I left the shop with the watch in my pocket and the air outside colder than before. The town was half buried in white smoke, curling from chimneys, the church bell marking the hour. 12 again. I don't know why, but I stopped in front of the old clock tower near the square. Its hands were moving slow but steady, the tick echoing through the empty street. For the first time, I lifted the pocket watch to my ear. This time, I heard it not ticking exactly, but breathing. A faint pulse, the sound of something remembering what it was made to do. I smiled. It wasn't a miracle. It was something quieter. It was faith in its smallest, most human form. The drive home felt shorter. The road seemed lighter. The snow no longer looked like absence. It looked like forgiveness settling softly over everything we once got wrong. When I returned, the house felt different. The cold didn't cling the same way. The candle on the table had gone out completely, but the room held a soft, lingering warmth. I set the watch beside her photograph and whispered, "You were right. I just forgot how to listen." For a while, I sat there, not moving, not thinking, just listening. To the wind against the window, to the creak of the old floorboards, to the faint hum that might have been silence or might have been her. Then I realized something simple. The gift she never sent wasn't the watch. It was time given back, one heartbeat at a time. I looked at the clock again. Midnight had passed long ago, but the hands didn't care. They pointed forward, always forward, as if time itself had forgiven me too. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Slow, soundless, merciful. I stood by the window, watching it cover the world in white, and whispered the same words she once said. There's something peaceful about broken things. And for the first time in years, I believed her. That night I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't rest, that waits. I sat in the living room with only a candle and the old watch for company. The flame bent and swayed, stretching my shadow long across the wall, like time itself moving in slow motion. I opened the drawer and took out a small screwdriver, the one my wife used to laugh at. "You keep these things like you can fix what's already broken," she'd say. I smiled at the memory. Maybe she was right. But tonight, I wanted to try. The back of the watch clicked open with a soft snap. Inside, dozens of delicate gears lay covered with a thin film of dust like the breath of something that had been asleep for years. I turned one wheel gently, then another. Nothing. The air felt suspended, the way it does before snow begins to fall. Then came a sound, a single fragile tick, then another, not sure of itself, but alive. I stopped breathing. Every beat sounded like a heart trying to remember how to live. It trembled, stuttered, and then steadied, awkward at first, then calm. I closed my eyes. It wasn't the sound of time returning. It was the sound of forgiveness, finding its voice. For a moment, I saw her standing in the kitchen back, turned humming softly as she washed the dishes. The rhythm of her movements matched the ticking, perfectly patient, unhurried, gentle. The whole house once moved to that rhythm. Her laughter, the boiling kettle, the whisper of wind against the window. I had called them noise. Now I knew they were the sound of life. I closed the watch and held it in my palm until it grew warm. The ticking didn't stop. It didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to continue. Outside, the snow was still falling. Under the streetlight, each flake shone briefly, then vanished before it touched the ground. Maybe people are the same, brief, bright, and gone, but real while they last. I whispered, not sure if I was speaking to her, to time, or to myself. You were right, it never stopped. I just forgot how to listen. The candle leaned to one side, its soft, gold light washing over the framed photo on the table. Her face looked younger, peaceful the way she used to smile when she caught me watching her. I realized I was smiling too, not because time had turned back, but because I'd finally stopped running from it. I placed the watch beside the photo. The second hand kept moving quiet and steady. Each small tick felt like a promise, whispered into the dark. Still here, still going. The wind slipped through the eaves, bringing with it the scent of fresh snow. I opened the window. The cold air filled the room, sharp and clean. It didn't sting, it cleared. The world outside seemed rinsed, forgiven. In the distance, I thought I could hear her voice again. Not every silence is empty. Some are just waiting to be understood. Now I understood. Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a space you stay in long enough for the past to stop begging to be saved. I watched the second hand sweep past 12, then 1, then 2. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the sound. Each beat didn't remind me of loss. It reminded me I was still here, still listening, still alive. When the candle burned down, I didn't light another. I let the darkness take the room to see if it still scared me. It didn't. The darkness wasn't empty anymore. It had a heartbeat. It had the small, persistent voice of a watch that refused to quit. I sat in that quiet and felt something shift, slow and deep. Maybe this was what she'd wanted me to learn all along. Time doesn't heal anyone. It simply waits until we learn to forgive ourselves. I smiled softly. Outside, snow kept falling, each flake landing like a sigh too small for words. Somewhere in that sound, I thought I heard her laugh, faint, distant, but true. And in that little house in the heart of winter, the old watch kept counting, not the seconds I had lost, but the life that was beginning again. Morning came slow, not bright, but forgiving. The snow outside had stopped, and the sky wore the faintest shade of gold, the kind of light that doesn't burn, only reveals. I carried the watch in my hand, as if it were something living. It was still ticking, steady, calm, like it had always known what to do while I was the one who'd forgotten. The house was quiet, in a way that felt earned. Every room seemed softer, lighter. I made coffee, out of habit, poured 2 cups, and set one across the table. The steam rose from it, twisting upward, before fading into nothing. I didn't move it. Maybe ghosts drink in silence, too. The photograph of her on the mantel caught a slice of morning light. Her eyes, those calm, unblinking eyes, seemed to watch me as I buttoned my coat. I whispered, "You kept your promise." I didn't mean to say it out loud, but the air felt ready to hear it. Outside, the snow was melting at the edges of the porch, breaking into thin rivers of silver that caught the sun. I stepped out and set the watch gently on the railing. The metal shone faintly, the second hand sweeping without hesitation. It looked smaller in the daylight, less sacred, more human. For the first time, I realized that maybe it was never meant to be a symbol of her absence. Maybe it was meant to teach me how to be present again. The world around me was waking up. A few birds called from the trees, their notes uncertain but hopeful. Somewhere down the road, a church bell rang once. I didn't count, I just listened. The watch ticked softly beside me, and I found myself whispering, "You were right, time never stopped. It just changed hands." I sat on the porch step, the cold wood pressing against my palms, and watched the sunlight spread slowly across the yard. The chair I'd left there days ago. Her chair stood in the same place, catching the full warmth of the morning. For the first time, it didn't look lonely. It looked complete. I thought about how she used to talk about light. It's not something you see, she'd say. It's something that lets you see everything else. Back then, I didn't understand. I do now. The light wasn't meant to remind me of her. It was meant to remind me of what she left behind. The ability to look again. The watch ticked louder for a moment, or maybe my heart did. I lifted it, turned it in my hands, and saw my reflection on its surface, lined older, but still here, still breathing, still learning. I placed it on the chair beside the candle stub and her old notebook. The 3 of them sat together like a quiet trinity, time, memory, and forgiveness. I didn't bow. I didn't pray. I just stood there and watched as the light touched them all. The ribbon from the notebook fluttered once lifted by the wind and drifted across the yard. I let it go. Some things are meant to stay only long enough to teach you how to release them. The air carried the scent of thawed pine and wet earth. I closed my eyes, listening to the soft dripping of melting snow from the roof. Each drop hit the ground with a small, distinct sound. like seconds passing, like moments finally allowed to move forward. When I opened my eyes again, the chair and the watch were glowing under the morning sun. The second hand swept past 12 and began its slow climb again. I smiled because I knew what it meant now. Not a reset, not a loop, just continuation. The way life always was meant to be. I whispered one last time, not to her, but to the air that still remembered her shape. Thank you. For the silence, for the time, for staying long enough to teach me how to leave. I stood there a while longer, until the light grew brighter and the air less cold. The world wasn't waiting for me anymore. It was simply existing, and I was part of it again. When I finally picked up the watch, it was warm from the sun. The ticking was steady. Now, no hesitation, no tremor. I slipped it into my coat pocket. It rested against my heart, the rhythm syncing with my own. And as I walked down the porch steps, leaving footprints on the wet snow, I understood something I'd never said out loud before. Forgiveness isn't what frees you from the past. It's what teaches you to walk beside it. The light followed me as I went quiet and patient the way she used to. Behind me, the chair stayed in the sun. The watch's shadow stretched across the wood like a heartbeat carved in gold. And for the first time since she left, I didn't look back. By late afternoon, the light had thinned into that quiet gold that belongs only to winter. I drove without really knowing where I was going, the watch ticking softly in my coat pocket. Every sound inside the car seemed to move in rhythm with it. The turn signal, the tires on wet snow, even my own breathing. The road wound up hill through a small forest of bare trees until the steeple of the old church came into view. It looked the same as it had the last time we were here together years ago, when she'd brought me to the Christmas Eve service, even though I didn't believe in much then. She said faith wasn't about believing in heaven. It was about believing you could still be forgiven while you were alive. I parked outside the gate. The world was wrapped in silence, the kind that feels older than sound itself. When I pushed the door open, the hinges groaned like an old hymn. The air inside was cool, still smelling faintly of wood and candle wax. I walked down the aisle slowly, the same way I had once walked behind her at our wedding, afraid to step too loud, afraid to wake the past. The altar was small, draped in white cloth. A single candle burned there, thin and steady, its flame barely moving. I took the watch from my pocket and set it beside the candle. The light caught the glass, turning the face of it into a small, trembling sun. The ticking filled the space between heartbeats. For a moment, I didn't move. Then I whispered, "It's still working." My voice sounded strange in that place, soft but full. It echoed just enough to make me feel like someone was listening. Maybe she was. Maybe silence was her way of answering. I sat in the front pew. The wood was cold grounding. The church was empty, except for the sound of the clock and the occasional shift of the flame. Outside, the wind brushed against the old windows, a whisper of snow against glass. I thought about what she'd written in that letter. Maybe this year you'll stop counting the time you lost. For so long I had treated those words like an accusation. Now they sounded like an invitation. I pulled the watch closer, let it rest in my hands again. Its weight was barely there, but it carried more than it should have. Years' memories, small forgivenesses I hadn't earned, but was given anyway. I used to think I was keeping you alive, I said softly. But maybe you were keeping me. The candle flickered, as if voting in agreement. I remembered how she used to sit beside me during the holidays, her hand resting just near mine, but never touching. We were good at silence, she and I. Too good. We'd built our peace out of it, not realizing that peace and distance can wear the same face. The clock ticked again, and in that small sound, I felt something open, like a door that had been closed too long. It wasn't grief anymore. It wasn't even love, at least not the kind that hurts. It was something lighter, something that stayed. I stood and placed the watch back on the altar. You can rest now, I whispered. We both can. When I turned toward the doors, the light from the candle stretched my shadow across the aisle. For the first time, it didn't look alone. It looked accompanied, like it had remembered how to share space again. Outside, the sky was deepening into that pale blue that comes right before night. The first star appeared, small, steady, almost defiant, against the cold. The church bell rang once, then twice, then 3 times. I didn't count. I just let the sound wash through me. I looked back through the doorway. The watch still gleamed on the altar, tiny and gold. A quiet heart, still beating in the middle of winter. That was when I understood memory doesn't belong to the dead. It belongs to the living, the ones who keep listening long after the story is done. I closed the door gently, the latch clicking into place like a heartbeat, finding its rhythm. The cold met me again, sharp and honest. Snow was falling softly now, almost invisible in the fading light. As I walked down the path, I heard the bell once more, faint, distant, but steady. I smiled. The sound followed me all the way to the car. When I sat behind the wheel, I didn't start the engine right away. I just listened. The echo of the bells, the wind against the windows, and somewhere inside my coat pocket, the faint ticking that had learned to keep time with me. I whispered one last thing before driving home, words that felt simple but whole. It's not goodbye anymore. It's just the sound of memory, learning how to breathe. And as I drove back through the snow, the world seemed lighter, the night less final. Somewhere between each tick and tock, I could still hear her voice, quiet, forgiving, and endless. Night had returned, but it didn't feel like darkness anymore. The snow had stopped hours ago, leaving the world clean, untouched. as if even time had taken a breath. I sat outside on the porch, the watch ticking softly in my pocket, my breath rising in slow clouds. The stars were sharp, tonight cold, distant, but somehow merciful. I thought about the first winter we spent together. She used to say the sky looked lonelier in December because everyone was too busy looking down. Back then I never understood what she meant. Now I do. When grief comes, it teaches you how to stare at the ground. Forgiveness teaches you how to look up again. The world was silent, except for the soft ticking beneath my coat. I pressed my hand over it and felt its rhythm, small, constant, alive. I realized that for months, maybe years, I'd been waiting for something dramatic, a sign, a vision, a voice from the other side. But the truth had been simpler. She'd left me sound instead of words. A heartbeat that didn't belong to her or to me, but to both of us shared across the quiet. The cold air stung my eyes. I looked toward the church in the distance, its windows glowing faintly. Somewhere inside the candle still burned beside the watch's reflection. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to go back and take it. Some things belong better to silence. I thought about everything she'd said over the years, the kind of wisdom that doesn't arrive wrapped in lessons. "Don't make time your enemy, John," she once told me. "It's already carrying enough for both of us." I never really listened. I was too busy measuring days, counting apologies that came too late, waiting for the world to hand me back what it had taken. But that's not how it works. Time doesn't give you back. It gives you forward. I looked at my hands, lined, steady, older than I remembered. There was a peace in them now. The kind that comes only when you finally stop trying to win against life. Maybe that's what she'd meant when she ordered the watch. Maybe the message wasn't about time at all. Maybe it was about motion, the kind that never announces itself. The kind that keeps going even when no one is watching. Somewhere nearby, a single church bell rang. Just once. The sound spread through the stillness like light through water. I closed my eyes and let it fill the spaces between my thoughts. I used to think loss was the opposite of love, I said quietly to no one. But it's not. It's proof that love existed in the first place. The words hung there for a moment, soft, almost invisible. I smiled, because even if no one heard them, they still mattered. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the watch. Its face caught the faint reflection of the stars. The ticking was steady, now stronger than it had been in years. I turned it over, tracing the engraving with my thumb, for the man who never stopped waiting. I whispered, "I stopped waiting, Emma. But I never stopped listening." And I meant it. The truth about forgiveness is that it doesn't change the past. It changes your posture toward it. You stop bracing for the next blow. You stop counting what's gone. You start hearing again the wind, the silence, your own heart, remembering how to move without fear. I stood up. The snow crunched beneath my boots. The cold slipped into my lungs, sharp but clean. I looked toward the horizon where the faint glow of dawn had begun to rise, thin, hesitant, but sure. The first light of a new day. I placed the watch on the railing again, letting it catch that soft gold. It looked right there, between earth and sky, between what was lost and what remained. Maybe this is what you wanted, I said softly, not for me to move on, but to move with. The wind answered by brushing past my sleeve, gentle as her touch used to be. The sound of the world returning to itself. I stayed there until the first rays of sun broke across the snow, turning everything to quiet fire. And in that light, I felt something lift, not grief, not memory, but the weight of holding on. The watch kept ticking. The sky kept widening, and I, for the first time in years, simply stood still and let both happen without trying to measure them. Because maybe the greatest mercy time ever gives us isn't more time. It's the chance to stop counting. A year later, the snow returned the same way. It always did, quietly, without asking permission. I was walking through Fairview. Again, the small town where the antique shop still stood. The sign out front had faded a little, its gold letters softened by weather and time, but the smell of cedar and dust was exactly the same. I hadn't planned on coming back. I was on my way somewhere else, a meaningless errand, maybe just an excuse to drive, but when I saw the crooked sign, I stopped. Some places, it seems, remember you, even when you try to forget them. Inside, the bell above the door rang same as before. A young woman stood behind the counter now. She looked up and smiled politely, that practiced smile of someone who meets strangers for a living. "Can I help you, sir?" I hesitated, then reached into my pocket and pulled out the old watch. A year ago, I said slowly, "My wife ordered this from here. She passed away before it arrived." The woman nodded. "I remember the story. My father told me about it. He retired last spring." She studied the watch, gently turning it in her hands. "Still running," she said with a small smile. "Yes," I said, "still running." She looked at me for a moment, then disappeared into the back room. I heard the sound of drawers sliding, paper shifting. When she returned, she was holding a small wooden box, newer than most of what the shop carried. She placed it in front of me. "This was left for you," she said. "No return address, but it came 2 weeks ago. My father said if you ever came back, I should give it to you." My throat tightened. "Are you sure it's for me?" She nodded. "It's addressed to Mr. John Miller, same handwriting as before." I just stood there for a long moment staring at it. The lid was tied with a thin gold ribbon, frayed a little at the edges. I untied it carefully, afraid it might vanish if I moved too fast. Inside was another watch, smaller, delicate, with a faint rose gold shimmer. Its glass was clearer than the one I carried, and engraved on the back were 7 words. For the woman who finally let him go. I stared at it until the letters blurred. The young woman said nothing. She must have known that silence was the right language for this kind of moment. "How?" I began, but the words broke apart. "She ordered it," the woman said quietly. "Same time as the first one. She told my father to hold it until the following Christmas, and if you came back, to give it to you. If not," she hesitated, "she said to keep it ticking anyway." I couldn't speak. The clock in the corner of the shop ticked softly, and somewhere in that rhythm, I could almost hear her laugh, faint, knowing, like she was still a step ahead of me. I picked up the second watch. It was warm somehow, though it hadn't been near any flame. The second hand was already moving, not frozen, not waiting, just alive. I asked, "Do you know what kind of mechanism it is? It shouldn't still be running." The woman smiled. "My father said the same thing last year." She shrugged. "Maybe some things don't need winding." Outside, the snow was falling again, slow, deliberate quiet as breath. I stood by the window, both watches in my hands, one for the man who never stopped waiting, one for the woman who finally let him go. Together they ticked in harmony, one heartbeat, chasing the other, 1 second, forgiving the next. I closed my eyes and listened. It wasn't 2 watches anymore. It was one rhythm, shared between 2 silences. When I left the shop, the world had turned gold gray, the kind of color that only happens when the sun meets snow. I walked without hurry, my footprints vanishing almost as soon as they formed. At the old bridge overlooking the frozen river, I stopped. The air was cold, the kind that makes you remember you're alive. I set the second watch gently on the railing beside me. The sound of its ticking mixed with the wind, faint but unbreakable. I whispered, "You kept me alive, Emma. Now it's your turn to rest." Then I placed my watch beside hers. For a moment, the 2 of them ticked together, perfectly aligned, like one heartbeat split in 2. Then one slowed, then stopped. The other kept going. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt balance. I picked up a loud that was still running and slipped it into my pocket. The other I left on the railing. The snow was already starting to cover it, soft and white, like the world was tucking her in. When I walked away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Some goodbyes don't need witnesses. At the end of the bridge, I paused and listened. The sound of one ticking watch followed me through the cold, steady, calm, eternal. And in that moment, I realized the truth. Love doesn't end when time runs out. It ends when you finally learn how to let it keep going without you. The night I came home from Fairview, the house greeted me the same way it always did, quietly. Only this time, the quiet wasn't hollow. It felt like breath, like waiting. Snow had gathered again on the windowsill, soft and untouched. The candle on the mantel had long melted down to its base, but the scent of pine and wax still lingered, faint but faithful. I hung my coat by the door and stood still, letting the silence settle around me. The watch, the one I had kept, was still ticking in my pocket. I could feel it through the fabric, steady as a pulse. I took it out, the face gleaming faintly in the light of the street lamp outside. The sound filled the room. Tick, tock, tick, tock. A heartbeat for a house that had forgotten how to breathe. I placed it back on the table next to her photograph, and then I saw it. The other watch, the one I'd left on the railing of the bridge, was sitting beside it, dry, clean, whole. I froze. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. I hadn't brought it home. I was sure of that. Yet, there it was, and it was ticking. I reached out with trembling hands. The second hand swept across 12, confident, alive. Beneath the glass, faint condensation shimmered in the shape of a fingerprint. Hers maybe, or just the ghost of it. I whispered, "Emma." Nothing answered. No voice. No weak soul. Just the least tad of time refusing to die. But I didn't need a voice. The truth was already speaking. I understood it now. She hadn't come back. She had never really left. The two watches ticked together, slightly out of sync, but not discordant. One just a fraction ahead, one a breath behind, like two souls keeping time on opposite sides of eternity. I sat down. The light flickered softly. The house seemed to hum a low, almost invisible vibration that came not from the wind or the walls, but from within me. There are moments when words stop mattering, when all that's left is understanding. That night was one of them. I thought about all the years I'd spent measuring life in wrong directions, how long she'd been gone, how far I'd fallen, how much silence had filled the space she left. But maybe the point of living isn't to measure time, it's to let time measure you. To let it teach you how to endure without turning to stone. I looked at her photograph again. In the dim light, the shadow across her face softened, and for a heartbeat, I could almost see her smile move. Not as memory, as presence. "I get it now," I whispered. "You didn't send the watches to remind me of you. You sent them to remind me of now." I stood up and turned off the lamp. The only light left was from the window, the moon reflected off the snow, painting the room in silver and gold. The two watches ticked together, their rhythm slow and certain. I closed my eyes, breathing with them. For a long time I stood there in that quiet feeling, something I hadn't felt in years, peace, but not the kind that numbs, the kind that understands, the kind that accepts. Outside, a gust of wind passed through the trees. It sounded almost like laughter. I opened the window. The cold rushed in, biting, but alive. The snow outside glittered like 1,000 tiny clocks, each frozen in its own second of light. I reached out, holding the ticking watch toward the night. "You can rest now," I said. "We both can." The second hand moved once more, then stopped. Not abruptly, gently. Like it had decided its work was done. I didn't feel sadness, only stillness. The kind that follows completion. The kind that knows endings are just the shape, beginnings where, when they're tired of explaining themselves. I placed both watches side by side on the windowsill. Their glass caught the moonlight and threw it back into the room, scattering small reflections across the floor. The sound of silence filled everything else. I sat back down in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the moment breathe through me. For the first time in a lifetime, I didn't chase time. I let it arrive. Because maybe love isn't something that leaves or returns. Maybe it's just something that waits quietly until you're ready to hear it again. And when you finally are, it speaks through the simplest sound in the world. Not words, not music, just time forgiven. Morning came with the softest kind of light, the one that doesn't rush through the windows, but drifts in like a memory. Snow had settled again overnight, clean and endless, muffling the world to a whisper. I woke to the sound of a car door closing outside, followed by footsteps crunching on the path. Through the frosted glass, I saw a familiar silhouette. Broad shoulders, hesitant steps. Ethan. He hadn't told me he was coming. He rarely did anymore. We'd spent too many years talking through pauses, each of us waiting for the other to start a sentence that never came. But this morning, something felt different. When I opened the door, he was standing there with his hands deep in his coat pockets, his breath rising in small clouds. "Morning, Dad," he said softly. "Morning," I answered. "You drove all this way." He nodded. Didn't want to miss Christmas. We stood there for a moment, two men sharing the same silence that used to divide them. Then I stepped aside. "Come in, it's warmer inside." He entered carefully, almost reverently, as if the house itself might break. His eyes fell on the mantel, the photograph of his mother, the two watches resting side by side on the windowsill. He walked toward them slowly. "You found Mom's watch," he said. I nodded. Or maybe it found me. He smiled faintly, that same small half-smile he'd had as a boy. She always loved her mysteries. The ticking filled the room again. Ethan listened for a while, then turned to me. "It's strange. I can't tell which one's hers and which one's yours." "Does it matter?" I asked. He looked back at them. "No," he said quietly. "I guess not." We sat at the table without speaking much. I poured him coffee. The same 2 cups, same chipped mug she used to tease me for keeping. The steam rose and curled, like faint ghosts between us. After a while, Ethan said, "You know, I never understood why you kept this house. I thought maybe you couldn't let go." I looked at the window where the watches caught the morning light. "Maybe that's true," I said. "But lately, I think I didn't stay to hold on. I stayed to listen." He frowned slightly. To what? "To what remains after everything else leaves." He didn't answer. But I saw it. The understanding flickering behind his eyes. Quiet, reluctant, but there. He reached for one of the watches, held it in his palm, and listened. "It's steady," he whispered. "Like her voice." I nodded. "And yours?" He looked at me. then really looked, and I realized how much time had passed since I'd last seen my son as something more than a mirror of my own mistakes. He wasn't a boy anymore. He wasn't waiting for me to fix anything. He was simply here, present. I said you should keep it. He looked startled. The watch. Yes, the one still ticking. He hesitated. Are you sure? I smiled. Time's always meant to move forward. Maybe it's your turn to keep it. He stared down at it, the light dancing across the glass. What about you? I nodded toward the one that had stopped. I've got enough silence now. He didn't argue. He just closed his hand around the ticking one and slipped it into his coat pocket. The faint rhythm continued, now carried by a new heartbeat. The fire crackled softly in the grate. Outside, the snow began to fall again, large, slow flakes drifting past the window like tiny seconds descending through air. Ethan stood and went to the window, staring out at the quiet world. Mom would have liked today, he said. She would have loved it, I said. She always said snow makes people honest. He smiled again, softer this time. Yeah, she did. We stood there together, father and son, watching the snow fall. The silence between us didn't ache anymore. It rested. It belonged. After a while, he turned to me. You ever wonder why she chose watches? I thought about it, then shook my head. No. But I think I understand now. He waited. She wanted to prove something, I said. That love isn't measured in how long it lasts, but in how it moves, who it reaches next. He nodded slowly, the truth of it settling somewhere deep. Then he said, I'll keep it safe. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Don't keep it. Live with it. Let it keep you. For a moment, neither of us moved. The light from the snow filled the room soft and gold and forgiving. When he finally left, the sound of his footsteps faded into the white. The house grew still again, but it wasn't empty. The air still carried the faint rhythm of the ticking, distant but alive, moving away, carrying her heartbeat into another life. I turned to the remaining watch on the windowsill. It stayed silent, but somehow it no longer felt broken. It felt complete, I whispered. You passed it on Emma. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Outside, the world was still falling in slow motion, each snowflake, a quiet second, in an endless clock I no longer needed to wind. Evening arrived like a held breath. The light faded slowly gold into gray, into something gentler. I sat by the window for a long time after Ethan left, watching the snow erase his footprints, one by one. It struck me how easily the world forgets and how merciful that can be. The watch he took was gone now, carried in his pocket, its heartbeat moving with his. The other remained on the sill beside me, silent, still perfect in its rest. I found myself tracing the outline of its glass, again and again, as if the motion alone could keep me connected to something invisible. It didn't need to tick anymore. Neither did I. The fire had burned low, but I didn't add more wood. I wanted to hear the sound of the house breathing on its own, the soft creak of the walls settling, the sigh of wind pressing against the window pane, the quiet presence of time just existing. I closed my eyes. I thought about the word impermanence. It used to frighten me, the idea that everything ends, that every warmth has an expiration date. But now, after everything, it sounded different, softer, like grace in another language. Because maybe the mercy of life isn't that things last. It's that they don't. Nothing permanent ever teaches us how to love. Only endings do. I stood up and put on my coat. The night outside glowed faintly, the snow reflecting light that didn't seem to come from anywhere in particular. I opened the door and stepped out. The air was sharp, but it didn't sting. It felt clean, honest. The trees whispered in the distance, their branches heavy with white. I walked slowly toward the edge, the yard, where the world turned into open field. Every step crunched softly, marking a rhythm older than thought. When I reached the fence, I stopped and looked up. The sky was enormous, an ocean of quiet stars scattered across black silk. Somewhere above me, time stretched and folded and forgot itself entirely. Down here, it felt smaller, manageable, kind. I took the silent watch from my pocket and held it up to the sky. The metal was cold, but my hands didn't shake. "You've done enough," I whispered. "You carried what words couldn't." The moon caught on the glass, turning it silver, almost translucent. For a moment, I thought I saw her reflection there, Emma's eyes soft and amused the way she used to look at me when I was too serious for my own good. Then the wind shifted, and she was gone again. But the peace stayed. I set the watch gently on the fence post facing the horizon. It belonged to the night now, to time, to everything that needed it more than I did. I took a deep breath. The air tasted like snow and smoke and something old but alive. If someone were to ask me what I'd learned after all this, after grief, after forgiveness, after the clocks and the years, I think I'd say this: you don't heal by holding on. You heal by learning what deserves to stay. Some things stay through sound, others through silence, and sometimes, if you're lucky, both. I looked back at the house. The windows glowed faintly in the dark, warm and steady. It didn't look like a monument to what I had lost anymore. It looked like shelter for what still remained. I smiled, not out of joy, but out of understanding. The kind that doesn't need words or proof. The kind that just is. Then, for the last time that night, I spoke not to the snow, not to the sky, but to her, wherever she might be listening. I don't count the seconds anymore, Emma. I just live inside them. The wind rose soft and slow, carrying the sound of my voice across the white fields until it disappeared into the quiet. The snow fell heavier, wrapping everything in its forgiving rhythm. I turned and walked back toward the house. Each step left a mark that shimmered before fading, and I realized something beautiful. Even if nothing lasts, everything matters because we were here to witness it. When I reached the porch, I stopped and looked once more at the fence in the distance. The watch caught a final glint of moonlight. Then slowly, its reflection dimmed. I didn't see it as an ending. I saw it as the world closing a gentle eye. Inside the house waited warm, breathing alive. I stepped through the doorway, hung my coat, and let the silence settle one last time. Not heavy, not empty, just right. And as I sat down in the same chair where this all began, I realized that nothing about time had ever been cruel. It was us, the ones who kept trying to hold it still. The watch on the fence would vanish under the snow by morning. But somewhere, beneath that quiet white blanket, it would keep what it was always meant to, a single moment perfectly forgiven. And in that I found peace.